Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Here at BE-terna, we are involved in a lot of digital transformation projects. And while doing them, we have overcome a number of different challenges. So today we want to share a couple of insights how we are doing this and how we are making this project successful. Now, digital transformation is a buzzword that has been going around for a couple of years, and you can find it in pretty much any industry. But today we want to focus on professional services specifically. Now, let's take a look at what we'll actually cover in today's event. In the first part, we'll try to dive into what digital transformation actually is. We'll try to answer questions like, what are the first steps? What approach to take? What do we need to consider before actually diving in? Once this is clear, we'll try to go into the more technology-based waters. We have invited an expert guest from USA who will share his insights on current challenges and trends in the professional services industry. Of course, we also invited a couple of experts from BE-terna to share their real-life experiences and to show you solutions that they actually use when implementing this kind of projects, solutions that we provide to our customers to solve their issues. And of course, at the end, it all comes down to a question, is this really worth it? So we'll look at a couple of KPIs and try to answer the question, do we have return on investment on this kind of projects? Okay. So let's dive into the first topic. Let's first start with what digital transformation actually is, because we see a lot of companies trying to go through the digital transformation journey and actually having the wrong idea at the beginning. So digital transformation is not just taking one digital solution like ERP, CRM, or webshop, or chatbots, or something like that, implementing it within the company and expecting that everything will change. A single digital solution or just implementing a digital solution won't change things for the better. Actually, if you're not careful, it can actually change things to the worst. So what we need to think about here, what we need to do that this actually will not happen? Well, we need to realize that digital transformation actually means transformation of the company, meaning that we need to change the company culture. We need to change the way how people work, how company operates. We need to take into the consideration stuff like company strategy, like processes, like services and products that the company is actually offering. And of course, very important in professional services industry, the people, and of course, our clients. If we fail to take everything into the consideration, we might end up with bad results. So how can we actually do this? What are the first steps? What do we need to do not to fail? Well, we need to prepare our digital strategy. Without a good digital strategy, we cannot have a good digital transformation. That is a fact. But how do we actually do this? Well, it all starts with defining a company vision and company strategy. And of course, company strategy and digital strategy are not the same thing. The first thing, strategy, and of course, vision of the company needs to be defined within the company. If not, we need to work on it. Once this is clear, then we can use this to start building digital strategy around all of this. Of course, the strategy of the company is not the only thing that influences our digital strategy plan. We also need to consider other factors, other drivers that we have. We can have drivers or influences inside the company, for example. Like we have a real urgency to automate some of the processes that we have within the company because there's just too much work and people are not willing to do this. People are maybe unhappy and are actually leaving. Or, for example, we have a technological, let's say, driver, technological input. Let's say that the company wants to start selling products or offer services online in a year. If we do not include this in our digital strategy, we won't have the technology that the company needs to actually provide those services. Or drivers or influences can actually come from external world as well. So let's say that you have a competitor who is using machine learning to recommend the best services to its customers. You are not doing that, and of course, are lagging behind. So at the end of the day, you have no choice but to implement this solution as well. So all of this needs to be part of the digital strategy. And if we are clear on this, then we know where we will end up at the end. So let's say that we define the digital strategy, that we have the high-level wishes, that we know where we want to go, but we still don't know where to start. We still don't know what is the first step, right? So how do we achieve this? Now, there are many approaches on the market, of course, but at BE-terna, we like to use Microsoft Catalyst approach for this. Microsoft Catalyst basically just covers the whole first part of the digital transformation journey up to the point where we actually start implementing digital solutions. So how do we do this, and why do we actually like it? Well, we like this approach because in the first part, it focuses on the people rather than technology. And people are the most important asset in professional services industry. So we start this process usually by defining the high-level topics that we pull from this digital strategy. We check and define the vision of the company, of course, and then we start conducting one-on-one interviews with the actual employees. We try to capture different views, try to capture different profiles to get a current, let's say, as-is state in the company from different perspectives. Once we know what are we working with, then we conduct a couple of workshops where we use techniques like design thinking, brainstorming, to get specific ideas, specific areas of improvement. And when we include all of the stakeholders in these projects, we also align all of the people in the company, and we make sure that they are all on the same page and they all want to achieve the same goal. Now, once we have all of these ideas and everything, we have a great list, let's say, of topics that we want to cover. We still don't know which one to pick and how to start. So maybe the most crucial part here is that we need to evaluate all of these topics, and we need to evaluate them in a right way. Most common mistake that companies usually do is they evaluate the implementation of the digital solution. So they actually just, for example, take the cost of the digital solution and the cost of the actual implementation, and that's it, right? They don't try to figure out what else needs to be in this package. What is the effort that is needed for this to happen, for this to actually work? So let's take an example. Let's say that a company wants to go paperless, right? And wants to make all of their documents digital. Now, it's one thing to implement this kind of software within the company, and this could take a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, and everything is okay. But it's another thing to educate, let's say, 1,000 employees to start working differently, to start using this new system, to start adapting to it, to start learning it. And this takes much more effort, and sometimes this effort is what actually counts. So if we take all of this into the account, then we end up with a proper list or a proper matrix of all of the topics that we need to cover. And this list can then be used to actually find the proper solutions, which in professional services industry is sometimes tricky to do. But we start with the solution or with the topic which is easiest to implement and gives us the biggest added value. And from there on, we just follow the list, follow the assumptions, the priorities that we got throughout all of these interviews and workshops and so on. And we can take this as some kind of a roadmap that will lead us through the digital transformation journey. Now let's try to just map this to a couple of cases to see how this complete digital transformation can actually influence the company, and that it's actually not just implementation of digital solutions. So if we take professional services company, for example, let's say implements new technologies, this can actually influence on what services or what products the company actually offers. So for example, before we can have a normal on-premise services, consulting and so on, But after the digital transformation, we can offer online services, maybe define new services and products that we didn't even offer to our customers before. Or digital transformation can change the way how employees within the professional services company actually work. We saw this kind of change in COVID times with hybrid work. Most of the companies were actually forced to do this transformation and use tools, and we all saw how this changed day-to-day operations for most of the companies. Now, not only employees and what company offers, we can also change how the company actually, let's say, implements things. So now, once we went through here at BE-terna, through all of these processes and digital transformation, we are now able to implement projects 100% remotely. This, of course, was not possible before starting this journey. And at the end, we must not forget that we have customers and that the experience for our customers can change as well when we are doing this. So, for example, they can get online education instead of a face-to-face. They can get knowledge 24/7. They can use knowledge-based articles. They can use chatbots and stuff like that. So even the experience of the customer can change and improve throughout this journey. So to sum it up, basically what you need to keep in mind is that digital transformation is not just implementing technology, although obviously technology is the vital part and very important. But you need to keep in mind that this transformation actually changes how the company works, changes the culture, and has effects on many different levels. As we learned in the last session, we need to prepare a list of topics and then find the appropriate solutions. Now, of course, it's good to know what these topics or challenges are in the professional services industry. We have invited an external guest, an independent consultant from the USA, Eric Kimberling, to share his thoughts on the matter regarding current challenges and trends in the professional services industry. Eric, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you for having me today. This is a really interesting topic, discussing professional services, digital transformations, and really understanding some of the nuances of digital transformation in the professional services space, as well as some of the things that professional services firms need to be aware of and some of the trends that we're seeing with other organizations that are in this industry vertical. The first thing is that when we look at why professional services firms go through these sorts of transformations or what they're trying to accomplish, typically what happens is they're trying to remove silos. They're trying to eliminate some of the silos between the different parts of their organization, whether it's the finance, the sales, the project delivery, the project management, the back-end customer billing. All that stuff typically and historically has been fairly fragmented and siloed within the professional services space. And part of that is because the technology hasn't been there or capable of handling professional services firms. A lot of modern day enterprise technologies were built for other types of industry like manufacturing or financial services or whatever the case may be. And professional services has been somewhat neglected until more recently. And so finding the technology that can actually specialize in and address the unique capabilities of professional services firms is one of the challenges and one of the more important things that you can do as an organization that's considering a digital transformation in this space. And so one of the things that we see clients accomplishing in this vertical when they're going through digital transformation is removing those silos and being able to have more of an integrated view into the integrated end-to-end business processes. So for example, I'll just give you a quick example in professional services. When you have a sales opportunity or a series of sales opportunities in your pipeline, you would capture that information in your CRM system. And that on its own is great, but what really adds value and provides greater visibility and better efficiency is when that information in the pipeline can then feed into your staffing decisions. So in other words, if I know that my pipeline is growing and I have more sales pursuits that I'm going after, I can quantify and predict how many of those opportunities I think I'm going to close, or based on history or based on other trends, how many of those opportunities I think I'm going to close. And that information should ideally feed into my staffing needs. So I can start to look at what my staffing shortages might be or what skill sets I need to bring on staff, which then feeds into my human capital management. So then I can start to recruit people that match that profile. And then ultimately, when we win that business from the clients in the sales pipeline, then we can ultimately transition that information into a project that is based on the information captured in the sales pipeline. It's based on the way we're going to staff the project, based on the human capital management and workforce management piece that we've done. And then we can deliver that project and manage that project within the project management piece of it. And then ultimately we bill the clients, we invoice, we receive money, et cetera. And then we can start to budget and forecast our financial results. So it's sort of a full circle of opportunity in integrated business processes. And a lot of professional services firms, for reasons I already mentioned, have that siloed mentality. They have siloed systems, they have siloed business processes. They don't tie all that information and workflows together in the way I just described. So really the key for organizations going through digital transformations in the professional services space is to really look for opportunities like that to automate their processes, to get out of that silo trap, to provide more integrated end-to-end business processes, and to provide better visibility, and just to be able to run the company more effectively than you might have in the past. And it's pretty amazing to see what sort of efficiency gains professional services firms can get by having more of an integrated approach and a more holistic view of end-to-end business processes. Another trend or another consideration that professional services firms typically will consider when they're going through digital transformation is having more data-driven decision making. So having visibility to data and being able to have better information. So in other words, rather than just having silos of data, as we just discussed, now you have information, integrated information, that you can now focus less time on manually capturing that data and manually manipulating that data, but instead having real-time access to that data to where you can now spend more of your time making decisions rather than gathering data. And that's a game changer for a lot of professional services firms, because being as labor intensive as professional services firms already are, the last thing you really want to do is add more inefficient processes and add more manual labor to the end-to-end operations. So having that data-driven decision-making and being able to spend less time manually collecting data and more time analyzing, understanding, interpreting, making decisions, being strategic, that is a big deal for a lot of professional services firms. It's a way that when you have integrated end-to-end processes and you've got that data available, now you can really start to focus on the business intelligence capabilities and not just getting reports that look at the past, which is important. You do need to look at the past and understand historic performance, but maybe even more importantly is using that data-driven decision-making to look to the future. So can we leverage algorithms and machine learning and artificial intelligence and other capabilities within technology to be able to predict what we think might happen in the future, so that, again, we can make decisions based on what the data and the information is telling us. So that data-driven piece of it is very important. And this is where predictive analytics comes into play as well. A lot of organizations are very focused not just on reporting, but also on predictive analytics and understanding what the trends are. So if you think about professional services firms, it can be very difficult to hire and retain people in a timely manner in a way to satisfy customer demand. And so if you have predictive analytics that gives you more of a runway or more of a lead time until you need those resources, you can now start to get ahead of the curve and not be scrambling and not be in reactive mode. And you can actually gather that information or have that insight to know when and how we're going to need to hire based on those predictive analytics and based on the data and the information that we're getting out of the system. So again, it's part of this whole data-driven decision-making is partially addressing efficiency or inefficiencies within an organization, but even more important than that, it's providing visibility and better decision-making and an ability to really be able to plan and run the business a lot more effectively than they might otherwise. The other thing too, I've talked a lot about the internal insights and internal data points that might help drive some of these decisions or drive some of the information that's needed or wanted out of the system. But it's also looking at the entire customer journey. So from the time a customer or a potential customer first interacts with your organization, a good technology will allow you to be capturing data about that prospect along the way. And so you have a lot of really rich insights, or you could be leveraging a lot of really rich insights as to what that customer's needs are, what the client's needs are, what their expectations are, what they're hoping to accomplish, and ultimately crafting a solution on the services side that better meets those client needs. So it's also not just planning on how you run the business, but maybe even more importantly, how you manage and deliver to your customers and providing them that sort of a customer experience that's ideal. And then obviously as that customer becomes a client and as you start billing them and you start gathering information about how profitable that customer is and potentially what other service opportunities there might be to upsell or cross-sell to that customer, that's the sort of information or the sort of benefit you can get from the data, the predictive analytics, business intelligence, and reporting out of a unified digital transformation set of technologies. So those are just some of the things that are enabled in terms of data-driven decision-making from professional services firms going through digital transformations. One last thing I'll mention too is that with integrated data and integrated business intelligence and just having a way to tie this all together and wrap all this together is not only do you have the efficiency gain, the visibility gain that you have from having better analytics, but also a really important benefit of this is the data protection. So being able to protect your data and ensure data privacy and knowing that your data is secure. What happens when you've got these siloed systems, or if you're operating from spreadsheets or tribal knowledge or some combination of all the above, is you end up with a lot of manual reentry of data, and data ends up moving around a lot to where you lose control of that data potentially. And so that's where data security issues come into play and why it's so important to ensure that you have data security. So a digital transformation in a professional services firm should also focus on ensuring that you've got that data privacy in addition to being able to provide the decision making that you might be looking for. Now, a third thing to keep in mind as it relates to digital transformations in professional services is the fact that disruption that's happening in the world around us, it demands agility. And I would argue that the world is full of disruption. Ever since COVID especially, there's been a lot of disruption to supply chains, to manufacturers, to us as consumers. So we've all experienced disruption, but I would argue that in the professional services space, that disruption has been even greater, partly because it's a people-based business. You're interacting with other people. It's a high-touch sort of business, a high human interaction type of business. And obviously, COVID and the pandemic and the fallout from that create some challenges for professional services firms. The other piece of that, too, is that given the Great Resignation and the fact that so many people have left the workforce for whatever reason, they've decided to go home and spend more time with their families, or they've just decided to take some time off. In some cases, they've been incentivized to not work because of government incentives for unemployment, things of that nature, depending on what part of the world people are in. But the fact of the matter is all of these things are adding up to disruption to the labor force, especially in professional services. And at the same time that this is happening, what is also happening, the other dynamic that's also fueling this trend is that as other organizations, non-services-based organizations, struggle to keep up with their labor workforce and staffing key jobs and unemployment being fairly low in a lot of parts of the world, it's created more of a dependency on services firms or professional services firms. So services firms are actually doing really well right now because so many organizations have scaled back on their own staffing, so therefore they lean on more third-party professional services firms in many cases. So this is all adding up to disruption, and it's creating this need for agility. And so a way to create that agility is to go through digital transformation and put technologies in place that allow you to automate your processes, allow you to have that integrated business process visibility that I described below or before, as well as having visibility into data and some of the predictive analytics that we talked about as well. So if you think about the sorts of agility you need, I mean, obviously with attrition or shortage of staff, one of the core components of agility within a professional services firm is going to be finding and retaining the right talent. So having that human capital management capability or the workforce management capability to not only identify, develop, and retain top talent, but also to help ensure that that top talent is placed on the right projects with the right customers or the right clients. And you just have to be able to adapt quickly to that, and technology is a way to do that. If you're still operating in silos and you don't have the information or the visibility to data that you should have or you could have, it's going to make it very difficult and highly inefficient and ineffective to be able to respond to that disruption and an ability to be agile as you would like. So making sure that you can identify staff people on the projects that are most suitable for them and the best match between those individuals and customers is very important. There's also just managing the projects themselves. With the world and presumably most professional services firms' customers going through disruption as well, their needs are changing. And chances are fairly high that in the middle of a professional services engagement, you may have pivots that you need to make. Customer has new requirements, or customer makes a strategic decision that affects the services you're providing in some way, and you need a way to be able to be nimble and agile and adjust to those disruptions and those changes. So being able to adjust your projects, to manage your projects against those evolving needs and requirements is something that's very important too. And then one last thing I'll mention is that when you think about your employees and your employee experience, it's already hard enough to find and retain talent as it is. And if you're using outdated technologies, highly inefficient processes, manual processes, a lot of grunt work, for lack of a better word, it's not going to create a positive employee experience, and you have a higher likelihood of having attrition. So if you can create a positive employee experience, not because their job is perfect or because a professional services firm is perfect, which no one is, but because you're providing better tools and better technologies that allow the workforce to focus more on higher value, strategic, white collar sorts of capabilities, then that's going to create a more positive customer experience or more positive employee experience, I should say, that will allow for a better attrition, or lower level of attrition, and more stickiness with your employees. And of course, having happier and a more motivated workforce is going to provide better service to your customers and your clients as well. So that's a big part of it as well. And then of course, one last thing I'll mention as it relates to the workforce and the agility required to manage a professional services firm is you think about today's day and age where we've sort of become accustomed to a hybrid environment where, yes, some people are in an office, but some people might be remote in a different country or a different city, whatever the case may be. And having the technology that supports that and provides the flexibility and the integration, regardless of where someone is based, is very important, especially in professional services firms. And then a fourth thing that's worth talking about is just the relationship to the overall sales pipeline. We were just talking about agility and how important agility is to manage disruption in the industry. And the same is true for your sales pipeline. When you're managing your sales pipeline, you want to make sure that you're adjusting and adapting to evolving client needs, even before their clients. So when they're customer or when they're prospects, they will likely have evolving client needs that need to be addressed. And so having the technology that allows you to, for example, identify what the right solution or the right service offering is for a customer, or a solution that allows you to craft a proposed project plan that is accurate and integrated and meets the customer's needs and wants. Again, better technology allows you to spend more time focused on your customer and less time focused inwardly on trying to gather information or trying to work through manual processes and things of that nature. So that's a really important thing too, is providing more agility and more responsiveness and more effectiveness in closing more business, because you're being more responsive to what the customer needs are, and you're more accurate in predicting or putting together a solution that best meets your customer's needs. So those are some things to think about as it relates to the sales experience too. And it's also another way to look at this too, is another benefit of technology and digital transformation in general as it relates to your sales pipeline, and not just your sales pipeline, but also just your customer base when they become customers, is you're providing a better customer experience. So you're not only providing a better employee experience that we mentioned a moment ago, but also the customer experience. How are you providing technologies that allow you to spend more time on focusing on your customers and providing whatever service it is that you need to provide? And certainly there could be opportunities to provide customer-facing technologies or customer-facing interaction with technology that might help depending on what industry you're in. For example, you might be able to provide more visibility and more insights to the customer that they wouldn't otherwise have. One example would be, we talked earlier about the project plans and how, the staffing models and knowing what kind of skill sets you need on a project and what the major milestones are and what the Gantt chart looks like, what the dependencies are. You can use technology to manage services in that way, but you can also not only use that internally, but that can also be something that's customer facing that provides additional confidence and additional value to your customers. So that's another way to think about this too, not just from the sales pipeline perspective, the relationship to the sales pipeline, but also just the overall customer experience is something that can be greatly enhanced by having this all intact. And so if we sort of summarize here, I think the main things that we're saying are that the software and the technology available in the marketplace today is evolving such that not all, and most technologies, I would argue, are not good at managing professional services firms, but there are technologies out there that handle professional services really well. And so the key is to find the technology that is best suited for your industry vertical. And also not just finding the right technology, but making sure you deploy it in a way that accomplishes these bigger, longer term, more strategic goals and objectives that we've talked about here today. So Andre, I hope this has provided some additional context, some additional insights as to what to expect with digital transformation and how digital transformation is really disrupting and improving and game changing within the professional services space.
Thank you, Eric. That was very insightful. I'm sure that our viewers got a lot of interesting takeaways. Now let's move on to our roundtable. Okay, now that we're all set up, we can start with the interesting discussion. So here with me today are Andrzej Krpic, Professional Services Industry Manager, and Igor Tasic, Customer Engagement Line of Business Manager. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Eric mentioned in the previous session that it is really hard to find solutions that fit professional services industry perfectly. I think that a good place to start searching is, for example, Forrester's report on project business automations. Now, we can find a lot of business solution providers there, but if you focus on the top enterprise level, we only find a few, like known names, like Microsoft, Oracle, and SAP. In those segments, we can find different solutions that are covering this area, like CRM or pipeline management, project management, resource management, customer portals, and so on. So, Andrzej, you are working with professional services companies basically every day. What would be your suggestion? What solutions can our clients use to solve this kind of issues?
Yeah, so it's very important to take a look at the end-to-end process. So let's, for example, look at a simple process in the professional services industry. For example, in IT sector, you begin with lead generation. So you follow your leads within sales, so CRM software, where you have some management of those leads. You have activities on the leads, and then you come to the let's say a process of offering. Then you transition into a different into project operations, where you create an offer from some kind of templates, predefined steps, and so on. You define everything that needs to be defined in the offer phase, and go to the customer, and hopefully you get a confirmation of the offer. Once the offer is confirmed, you need some kind of a solution to handle project management. In project operations, you have a solution where project managers can define the project with a timeline, plan activities with a Gantt chart, and so on. And in addition to that, you have to align resources. So when you plan some generic resources, then you have to actually staff those tasks. Using project operations resource management, you can search for your resources and align them to the project needs. Moving on, when the actual project is in the way, it's not only important that you track costs and time, it's also you have to have a tool to support your team doing the implementation. There should be a solution to track costs associated with the project, so expenses and procurement for the projects, and also log work hours via worksheets or a similar product. On top of that, there's of course the revenue part where customers need to be billed for the work. So it can be time and material project, it can be fixed price or milestone-based project. You have to set up the billing plan and, of course, do the billing according to the data that was entered in the system. So issuing invoices should be done in the way that is data-driven, and of course, that can be easily controlled and managed. And the underlying fact is that all those steps that we talked about in the operational process need to be available, if possible, in real time in the financials. So connecting these applications, as you said, sales, project operations, directly connected into the finance should be possible.
Okay, thank you. Now, if I understood correctly, basically with all of these solutions, you cover end-to-end process when you are, for example, doing the project as a professional services company, right?
Yeah.
But what about after you finish the project? What about after delivery? Do you have any solutions there?
Yeah, so for the entire life cycle of the project, it's not only when you finish the, let's say, implementation in the IT sector, there's also after implementation life cycle, which is, for example, support of the project and upsell. And then we have a returning loop into the sales, customer engagement, if we would have some actual work at the customer site, field services, and so on.
Okay. If I understood correctly, this end-to-end process is built with different solutions, right? But they are all connected.
Yeah, we're talking about Dynamics 365 family, so a family of business applications by Microsoft. Even if they have a different name, it's a very integrated solution. So we're not talking about different products and integrations between these products. For a customer, it is important that they get a solution as a whole.
Okay, great. Now, Eric also mentioned data management in the previous session. Now I know that when doing customer engagement projects, basically in every project we are faced with some kind of data management issue, or at least something that we need to solve. So can you, since you are in charge of the department and dealing with this daily, share some insights with us regarding how to solve these kind of issues?
Yeah, I mean, basically tackling those data management challenges, that depends on the type of the maturity of the customer, where they are as an organization, right? In reality, what we see every day is that a lot of our customers, in regards to customer engagement aspect, are at very early stages. They're all living in a highly fragmented data environments, right? Although some of the bigger customers have already started consolidating that data into data warehouses and similar solutions, right? But what they are missing in the large majority is actually turning that data into something actionable, right? So where we come in is actually at the very start, as we start to bring that data together, pull it into, for example, Dataverse, and start enriching their existing data with outside sources and putting that as a sort of a 360 view of their own customers. And that is then the baseline for all the decision making and the further support for their existing business processes.
You mentioned decision making, and yeah, that was also one of the topics in the previous session. So basically, how can we analyze the data, and how can we implement kind of data-driven decision making, right? So what would you say, for example, in professional services scenario, where can we find this? Where can we use solutions that incorporate this?
Yeah, so Igor already mentioned in his previous statements an interesting fact or interesting word, fragmentation. So it's very important that you have a system or a solution where this data is linked to each other as much as possible and that it's process driven, so that you don't have the same data in multiple areas. And if you can achieve that, you don't have to talk about, or you don't have to analyze much how to get information out of the data. So you only need to focus on the actual using that data for data-driven decisions. So if we're talking about Dynamics 365 family, where the data is pretty much integrated, we can use it through the entire process, and not only to see it in each of the steps, but also use this data to get back to each step and analyze or use it to improve or optimize each of the steps. So one example for that we commonly see on the market, especially in the IT companies, is the offering part. So it's very hard to do an offer with data that we get in the initial stages of the implementation project. And if you can get this loop back from retrospectives of the project that you did and create different templating mechanisms to offer, to create offers as exact as possible, this is a very beneficial thing. So it's not only when you get it into implementation, comparing the budgeted data versus the actual data, but also to get back into the previous steps, analyze them, and use this information to optimize and make your decisions more and more accurate.
Okay. I think mostly you're focusing on the data that is based on project operations and the process that you were describing earlier, right?
Yep.
But we also talked about, just a question before, about data management and how we centralize all of the data in CRM. So I imagine that we have a lot of customer data in one place already there. So do you maybe see some additional cases or scenarios? How would we use this data for, let's say, a data-driven decision making?
I mean, the obvious one is definitely more accurate forecasting in regards to operational revenues and things like that. The big thing is resource utilization, so to optimize that as well. The more data we get, the more accurate our utilization efforts and predictions are going to be. Because in reality, that is where a lot of effort goes into all of the professional services companies, right? So which project is now lasting too long, which resources got tied there, which project is starting. So balancing sales, operational delivery, and making sure that the right people are working on the right project. I think the more comprehensive overview of data that we have, the more we can streamline that process. And I think this is where the majority of the professional services companies are actually struggling with, and it's in the big majority that's manual work.
I think that most of your answers can be kind of explained with, reports and other functionalities that we already have, but we cannot avoid hot topic that's currently on the market, machine learning, especially ChatGPT. And since we are talking about real useful data, as you both mentioned, do you have any ideas or suggestions? How can we use machine learning in these scenarios? How can we use this to improve?
Yeah, so when we talked about artificial intelligence 2 years ago, nobody knew that we're going to get it as soon as we did. So it is very impressive what artificial intelligence can do. And of course, every business can thrive and benefit from this technology. So Igor already mentioned the automation is a very important part. And if we can get not the automation, but actually doing some kind of predictions and planning and so on from artificial intelligence, this is where the most beneficial aspect can be. So in professional services company, let's say planning a project and resources and finding the best resources, and not talking the best resources that we have available, but most appropriate resources for any of the activities, and not doing it manually, so that the project manager can focus on delivering the project and not sourcing and finding the right resources and planning the activities, because data is already available. We know what are the deadlines of the projects. We know what the capacities are needed. We know when the holidays are, and so on. And why does somebody have to deal with that manually if artificial intelligence can do that for us? And this work is not high value. So it means that if we can source it to artificial intelligence, it is very beneficial. So the actual resources that we have can focus on the things that bring most revenue to the company.
Yeah, I mean that would be definitely on my bucket list or on my wish list, because we have all of this data of existing projects, type of industry, size of the projects, type of requirements. Those things don't differ as much as our customers think it does. And also then, if we could use automation to learn basically on past experiences, then, for example, a project staffing, a project plan, or at least a very highly accurate first plan, that I see should definitely be automated. But maybe on the other side of that is also using machine learning and predictive analytics, of course, internally, right? So what can we do to reduce the churn of the people, right? Because I think in the past 2 years, the market, especially in the professional services, has been brutal, right? So the demand on the staffing, the hiring, that was really tough. The pressure on salaries went up. On the other side, the social economic situation is pushing from the other side, from the customer side, right? So how can we leverage that upcoming technology, or how can we harness that power for us to actually make our employees happier, or to predict, for example, their sentiment, let's call it like that, so that we can actually not risk as high of a churn as it was, because what was it? Well, how did they call it? The Great Resignation last year. It's not just professional services; it was everywhere, right? But just because of that, the companies turned to professional service vendors even more, right? And we had the same challenges, basically.
Very interesting use cases, I would say. Okay, to wrap up, maybe just a last topic that's really kind of connected to this. We had a lot of, we could call it market disruptions in the last couple of years. This machine learning being one of them, but obviously not the only one. How would you say that professional services companies can be more agile, can adapt to all of these disruptions using, let's say, Microsoft or any other solutions that we can provide?
Well, that's a question for me.
It's a question for both of you.
Yeah, maybe I can go. I mean, just the accessibility and the adoption of cloud infrastructure in general, and the maturity of those cloud solutions offer a really, I would say, like a robust way of managing that on a technical side, right? From the organization standpoint, I think companies need to do a lot in regards to their maturity level, right? So how ready are those companies to actually start transforming their business, or making a leap towards digitizing their own internal processes, or streamlining their internal processes, right? And that is not actually a technical endeavor. So it's a huge change management effort. And I think that aspect, or that mindset on how to approach this digital transformation is highly underrated.
Yeah, it's not that difficult to adopt technology if you're willing to adopt it. So if you're staying in the mindset that you were 10 years ago, or even now we're talking about years, the technology is available. As Igor mentioned, transition to cloud is a buzzword, it's happening, and the technology is evolving at an enormous pace. Adopting it, it's not that difficult, but you have to be willing to adopt it and knowing how to use it. So there is a lot of things that are happening, especially in big cloud provider services, or the list of services that any of the big cloud providers are listening is enormous. The pricing is flexible. You can use it as much as you want to. But as Igor mentioned, the most important thing is that the willingness of the entire organization from top to bottom is to know how to use it and be willing to use it.
Thank you both again for participating, and I think that we got some really good insights regarding these topics. Thanks.
Thank you again.
After an interesting roundtable, let's talk some numbers. As we promised, we'll try to answer the question if this kind of projects actually have a return on investment. To help us with this, I'm giving word to Andrzej Karpic.
We discussed a lot of things today, but one thing that everybody wants to hear are the numbers. To determine the success of digital transformation, calculating the return on investment is important. According to Statista.com, it is expected that digital transformation investment will exceed $1.6 trillion by 2023. Companies worldwide will spend $3.4 trillion on their transformation into digital organization as they make a move. Digital transformation, when executed correctly, can have a positive impact on return on investment. By implementing digital tools and technologies, businesses can streamline their operation, reducing cost, increasing efficiency, and enhancing customer experience. With improved data analytics and automation, companies can make data-driven decisions and identify new revenue streams. One of the major drivers towards the digital transformation is the desire to manage finance and operation processes better. According to the recent survey conducted by the Evanate, 88% of companies expect to see cost saving as a result of the digital transformation. Companies expect to reduce cost by an average of 10%. This reduction in cost is due to implementation of automation and digital technologies that eliminate manual processes and increase efficiency. Moreover, according to MIT, companies that have substantially completed their transformation see a 16% increase in the margins, which is 16% higher than industry average. In terms of business intelligence, adopting digital technologies that enable analytics and automation can help businesses see an average revenue growth of 5 to 10%. On top of that, organizations that have completed the transformation can expect to see a return on investment of 17%. It is old news that personalization drives performance and better customer outcomes. However, according to McKinsey, it's astonishing to know that companies that grow faster drive 40% of their revenue from personalization than their slower growing counterparts. Additionally, 71% of consumers expect companies to deliver personalized interactions. Professional services companies are most commonly project-based, so project management stays at the core of their digitalization process. By eliminating manual processes and streamlining workflows, companies can increase efficiency, reduce time spent on manual tasks, and focus on high-value activities. According to Evanate, digital transformation helps these companies increase productivity by 11%.
Thank you, Andrzej, and thanks to all of you for joining us. If you would like to know what these numbers could look like for you, please feel free to contact us.